So welcome everyone. Welcome to our introduction to JavaScript session. My name is Mihir Thakkar and I am the founder and instructor at Code Heroku. So for those who are new, even though I see a lot of familiar names, for those who are new, we are an online platform which is trying to change the way how students learn programming online. We host live and interactive workshops. Most of our workshops are free. And what we do is try to interact and engage with them rather than you watching some videos which were created few months ago. You work with us in a live workshop. We walk you through some programming concepts. And today we are going to see and learn JavaScript. And also let's make sure that we keep this session interactive and talk as much as we can on the chat. So if you have any questions, if you think that I'm going too slow or if I'm going too fast, please do let me know on the chat and I'll be able to correct myself or answer your questions. Before we move ahead, do you guys know where JavaScript is used or no? Do you have some sense of what are some applications where it's commonly used? Why would someone need to have JavaScript? So Zainam says it's used for server-side scripting. That's true. And server-side JavaScript has evolved in some recent years, but where is most likely that you have encountered a JavaScript? Avinash says client validation. That's true. Let's see what our session objectives, and the first thing that we are going to do there is we'll see why do we need JavaScript. What we're going to see is at no very basic level. And I know that we have a wide range of audience over here as well. A lot of you have no prior experience in programming and some of you have more than 2-3 years of experience in programming. So I have to know balance on both sides and make sure that everyone understands it. So please stay with me on that. Then we're going to see some basic syntax. What we're going to do is go and see some basic JavaScript syntax. But again, we don't want to stress too much on the syntax element of it, because what our philosophy is, we don't just want to teach you programming syntax, but we want you to be able to create some real software product that you can demonstrate to your friends or know in your job interviews, which is quite a different thing, right? And that's how we try to differentiate ourselves as well. Because there are a lot of programming classes out there or even in-person coaching tutorials or coaching classes which are going to teach you C, C++, Python, right? But at the end of the day, if the kind of things you are doing is sorting arrays or those kind of things, it doesn't really help you in real world. What we try to focus is on how can we teach you something so that you can build something by yourself, create a product, create a web app, create a dynamic HTML page, something on those lines. Okay. And then we're going to use an API to dynamically get data and update our web page. So today we are going to use a weather API. It's called Open Weather API. We are going to use the weather data that they provide. So we're going to use, let's say, what is the temperature today? And we're going to get this data from the server and populate our web page with it. Let's get started with it. Let's see why do we need JavaScript first. At a very high level, let's say you had an HTML page and there are some limitations to what you could do with basic HTML, right? Over here, I'm just printing out hello world to my HTML page. At most, what I could do is try to prettify it, add some background images, maybe even style it a bit. And that's it, right? That's where the limitation comes in. This is what you could do with it, just HTML. Or you could do things like create a table. Maybe if you add some CSS on top of it, you can style it properly and you can try to make it look good. But what if you have something like you want to add a new student to this table? So what do you do in that case? You can't have your user go inside your code and create a new table row over there, right? In these cases, when you want to add that interactivity to your web page, you need JavaScript. Or let's say you don't have this list of students beforehand. You want to get it from a server. Over here, you are calling a function called getStudents, which is executed on the application server, and you're getting those records from the database. In those cases as well, you'll need some JavaScript to get those elements or get those students from the database and populate it and show it to your user in a nice looking HTML page. Does that make sense? So here's what we are saying. JavaScript adds interactivity to HTML pages. That's why we need it. So let's see what JavaScript is. JavaScript is an object-oriented dynamic scripting language. Have you guys heard of any other object-oriented languages before? Some of you might have worked with a few object-oriented languages. Yes, Java is object-oriented. Python is object-oriented as well. Everything in JavaScript is an object, right? Even functions, the way that they get stored are in terms of objects. You could pass one function to another as objects, so which is quite useful, and sometimes it might be tricky as well. And it's dynamic scripting language, right? So you don't have to write things like int your number. It is dynamically typed, and also there are other dynamic aspects to it, and everything is interpreted at runtime, right? So you don't compile your JavaScript as such beforehand. Everything is evaluated and interpreted at runtime by something called a JavaScript engine, which is part of most modern browsers. And it is event driven as well. What I mean by it's event driven is it's not the lines of code that you write in JavaScript, it's not necessarily sequential. Each line could get triggered at any point in time through your HTML pages or by the JavaScript runtime engine. So think about it. Why would it be beneficial to have a programming language which is event driven and not necessarily execute all the lines sequentially? So for example, C code, you write the first line of code and let's say you have a second statement over there. Those two would get executed in a sequential manner, right? Could you think of reasons why would someone need an event driven language? Why would that be better? And to give you a hint, think about the synchronous and asynchronous functions that you might have heard about. Why would you need something which is asynchronous and event driven rather than having something which is synchronous and sequential? So that's one part. Yes, you want to perform actions depending on the actions of the users, and you don't know when that user interaction is going to be. So you don't always want to continuously poll something. You don't want to have a continuous loop trying to see if something is clicked or not, something has happened or not. You don't want to do that. You want to be an event driven so that whenever something happens, that triggers an event, and then there are some functions which are listening to that event. So think of it. Let me give you an example. Let's say if someone gives you 2 or 3 tasks to do, right? So he comes to you and gives you, okay, this is task 1, this is task 2, this is task 3. To do task 1, you need someone else's help. You need your friend's help. So you give this task to him and he says, you know what, I'm going to come back to you in 2 hours or so. So are you going to wait until 2 hours until he comes back and then you will do task 2 and 3? Or you would just go ahead and start working on 2 and 3. And by the time your friend finishes, you can then come and resume what you were doing on task 1. So you see, making things which are event driven or which is not necessarily always sequential, it might speed up things a lot. Let me know if you guys have any questions on why it is event driven. The whole point in being event driven is that one, you don't want to continuously poll for events, which as Jainam pointed out, that you want to perform actions based on users' action. And the next is sometimes having things which are asynchronous might speed up things a lot. Remember, in today's world, speed is everything. If you go to a web page which is very laggy, which is slow, you don't want to be over there. You might just drop off that page. So you want to make sure that you have a language which is running behind, which is dynamic in nature and which is handling events as they occur and not necessarily be in a continuous loop or be very synchronous or sequential. And to help you understand this concept of being event driven and not synchronous, we also need to understand that the differences between synchronous and asynchronous programming. So I think Deeptiman is asking something about synchronous and asynchronous program, and I'm going to take the question after this slide. So we need to understand what's the difference between a synchronous program and an asynchronous program. So let's see what happens in the case of synchronous programming. In a synchronous program, you have your main function. So in case of JavaScript, you don't have that function called as main like you have it in C, but there is definitely a main thread which is running. So let's say if there is a main function, and on the other hand, we have this thread for your synchronous function, and these are the live. So at first, the main function gives a request to your sync function, and then your synchronous function processes the request, right? And as soon as the process is finished, it's going to return the results back to the main function. But during all this time, this main function is almost blocked.
it can't do anything because it has to wait for those results to come back to it. So all this time, we are just wasting the time for the main function. So how do you get around this? Well, what you could do is, so instead of sending just the request, what you could do is, send a request along with something called as a callback. So in JavaScript, you could pass functions to other functions, right? So what you could do is, pass a callback function to your asynchronous function. It's almost like, sending a voicemail to someone and then saying, you know what, once you get free, call me back on this number. Right? So you are almost giving this function a number where they can call back to you on. So you are giving this function a callback. And once this is completed, once the process is completed, your callback is already waiting there for the results. And once your process is complete, your results are going to go back to the callback. So those are the two approaches on writing your programs. And again, during all this time, your main thread is not blocked. What you could do is now do other tasks on there. And that's the reason why we said that it was much more faster than synchronous programming. To make sure that your web page is responsive enough, we'll prefer most of the times writing an asynchronous program. Okay, does that make sense? If there are any questions or if you didn't understand, please make sure that you ask me at this point, because soon we are going to dive into the hands-on part of it. I didn't want to cover a lot of theory on this one, but we want to make sure that you still get some basics around JavaScript and know what synchronous and asynchronous programs are. Let's play with some JavaScript code. What I'm going to do is, I ask you guys to download the Sublime text editor, and that's what we are going to use in our today's lecture. But if you have any other text editors, I'm fine with it. So what I want you to do is just create a folder somewhere in your documents or wherever your workspace is, and then go to Sublime. So I went over here, Sublime text edit, and I opened it. So let me just close this previous file, and I want to say new file, and I want to save this file, save as, I'm going to say hello.html, and then save it. And once I have this hello.html file over here, what we want to do is create some boilerplate HTML code. And the way to do that is, let's say if I'm in Sublime, if I start writing HTML, it's going to automatically prompt me. So I said HTML, so it gives me an option to automatically insert HTML. So I'm going to press enter, right? So I automatically got this boilerplate HTML code over there, and I'm going to save. So here's what I did. I went to my search over here. I just said Sublime Text 3 because I had asked you guys to install Sublime. You could use any other text editor of your choice as well. And once you are here, I went over here. I saved this file as hello.html in the folder where I want to work in. And then I said HTML, and it automatically gave me a prompt. And I hit enter over here, and it created this boilerplate HTML template for me. Let's write some basic title over here, Code Heroku, and let's go over here. I'm just gonna create a simple header tag. So I'm gonna say welcome. Okay, so this is simple HTML, right? So I just created a simple header tag over there, and I said welcome me here. There is no JavaScript over here until now. So let's go ahead and write some JavaScript. And the way to write JavaScript within your HTML page is to use the tag called a script. Inside the script element, anything that you write, your browser is going to interpret that as JavaScript code and not simple HTML. So I started writing SC over here, and it gives me an option to write the script tag. So I'm going to press enter over here. It auto completes that for me. And then I'm going to come over here. So let's do a very simple hello world. So what I'm going to do is just say console.log hello world. I want to say save it. Once you write that part, what I want you to do is then you could go to your folder where you have this file. We have this hello.html file over here. I'm going to right click it, open with Google Chrome, or you could use any other browser as well. And as you see, I got my header tag, which was just HTML, but what we are looking for is the JavaScript code that we wrote over there, right? So you want to say go to inspect
So remember over here when we said console.log, we said hello world. This is not something that is going to get printed to the page. This is getting printed to the log file or the console over here, which is located at inspect, and you go console over here, and that's where you would see hello world. Okay, so this is more for us to debug our application and not to do things like if you want to print something out to the screen and see what's going on. That's here's where you would print it out. You would say console.log, and then you go to your browser over here and you say inspect and you say console, and that's where you'd see your console. So again, here's what we did, right? We wanted to print something to our console over here. This is not the same thing as writing to the HTML page, which is we just created an HTML element over here. Instead, what we did is we printed to the console, which is for debugging purposes, or no, if you want to print something out, we are going to use console.log, and we added this simple string over here, and it comes in the browser inspect element. You go to inspect and then console, and that's where you will see this thing. Okay, great. Now we could write to the console, right? So all well and good. But now what we want to do is instead of writing to the console, our users are not going to see these things in the console, right? This is more for the developing purposes. Our users are going to see what's there on the HTML page. And to do that, what we want to do is actually be able to manipulate this HTML element over here or write to this HTML page. And the way we are going to do that is using a library called jQuery. So this is how they describe jQuery. jQuery is the write less, do more JavaScript library. It's a cross-platform library, so it works on different browsers as well, and which is designed to simplify the client-side scripting. So if you want to manipulate your HTML elements or you want to work with them easily, you could do it using plain JavaScript as well, right? But what my purpose over here is to make sure that you also understand how things are done in industry or what is most likely that you're going to see in the companies that you work in. Over there, most people are going to use some sort of library to work with your HTML elements and not just directly use plain old JavaScript, right? So what we are going to do next is plug this library inside our code and be able to use that library to manipulate our HTML page. Okay, we want to add the jQuery library to our page, and the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to my Google search over here, and I want to find this jQuery library and I want to add it to my page. The way I'm going to look for it is I'm going to say jQuery, and then I'm going to say CDN, which stands for Content Delivery Network. So what that does is it's essentially someone has hosted this jQuery library for us on their web server or at some location. And now we could use that to add it to our page. You could also download it and store it on your server and use it. There are some other websites who are going to use the same CDN. So when your users come to your website, they already have this jQuery in their cache somewhere. That's the advantage of using a CDN, is that most likely the jQuery libraries which are used by other platforms, most other websites are going to use it. Your users already have it in your browser cache. It's not going to reload it. So what we are going to do is go to jQuery CDN. So instead of downloading it and then adding it, we are going to add it directly using the CDN. And we're going to go to jQuery CDN. Let's look for the latest version. So the latest version is over here. And these are all the same versions of the same file. It's just in different forms. At least uncompressed and minified is the same. So the slim might have some function slimmed in or trimmed in. I'm not sure on that. But what we're going to use is the minified version, which doesn't have any tabs or any extra characters are taken out from there. So any new line characters and all that is gone. What I'm going to do is I clicked over here. I clicked on minified version, and I'm going to take this code that I see over here. I'm going to say copy. This is what they're saying, that this is a script which is located at this location, code.jquery.com/jquery/3.3.1.min.js. And you could take this entire thing, copy it to your clipboard. Just before your code that you wrote over here, the custom code, I'm going to add this jQuery library. Just copy and paste it over here, save it, And that's it. So we added the jQuery library to our page. It's that simple. We went to the jQuery CDN. We could download it and add it to our page as well, but there is no need for us to do that. As long as we are connected to internet, we are good. Went over here, I said jQuery CDN. I took the minified version, copied this code and pasted it over here. So the next thing that we want to do is not just add it to a page, but we also want to be able to use that, correct? We want to be able to use that jQuery to edit some elements on our page. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to create a div. Okay, so it's simple HTML that we are writing. We're going to say div ID is equal to message. So we want to print a message to the user. So I'm going to create a simple HTML div and /div. Okay, so we created this simple HTML div called message. And now what we're going to do is dynamically add some elements to this div using our jQuery code. And the way to do that is we'll come over here. We're going to use the $sign. Whenever you see a $sign over there, that means you are using jQuery. You use your $sign. This means that I'm using jQuery. You add a selector to it. And the selector in our case is pound message. Why am I using hash or pound message? I'm telling my jQuery that go ahead and select any element on this page which has an ID of message. Whenever you have a pound or a hash sign, which means I'm referring to an ID parameter over here. Okay. What I'm telling my jQuery is go and look on this page. I want an element whose ID is message. I said select an element from this page whose ID is message, because we know that pound stands for ID, is an ID selector. And then I'm going to say HTML to write HTML to it. I shouldn't have pressed enter. Just say HTML. Don't press enter over there. And just say, how are you doing? Right. So we added a message over there and then save it. All we did was we said, go to our page, select an div whose ID is message and insert this HTML in there. Okay. We said .html is equal to how are you doing? Let's go back to our browser over here. Let's make sure I have the page open. Let's go to our browser. And as you see over here, we got our message printed. This is plain HTML that we did. And then we added this element dynamically over here. We said, how are you doing? Here's what we did. We added jQuery library over here. You could do it using plain JavaScript as well. But to make things simpler for us, you see how simple it was to just add a new HTML element to our page. We just went over here, we used the $sign over here, and then we said pound message, which is our ID selector, and then we said HTML, how are you doing? And that created a new element for us on this page. Okay, this was more like just printing to the screen, right? Let's also now get something from the user and try to get some interactions. What we're going to do is create a simple counter. We'll count from 1 to 10 and we'll have the user click on a button to increment that count. Here's how we will do that. Let's remove this welcome message and this ID. Let's create a count message. Let's say div ID is equal to count and say /div. And over here, this is where we are going to print our count, right? Outside of this, I'm going to say count is, and then I'm going to say div ID count. This is where we'll store our count. And then let's create a button, which the user is going to press to increment this count. Okay, so I'm going to create button. ID is button. And I'm going to have a text over here. The label for that button is also button. This is how you create a button in HTML. Say created a button and we gave an ID over here because we are going to use this later, and we created a simple button. Let's do this. So now once we created a simple HTML, what we want to do is when a user clicks on that button, we want to do something, correct? Let's go ahead and remove our previous code from there. And over here, what we're going to say is use our $sign for jQuery. And I'm going to say pound button, hash button. This is going to select our button. And I want to say when someone clicks on it, the right function to use over there is to use an on function, which is going to say on click. So we are saying to a jQuery that whenever someone clicks on this button, on click, you want to call this function. And the function which we are going to call it is, we're going to call it increment count. We are going to create this function called increment count, and we're going to call this. Okay, so if you want, you can add semicolons, but it's not necessarily, it's generally a good practice, but it's not needed. Unless you are adding two statements on the same line, this semicolon is not needed. Okay, so let's create this function increment count. So we're going to say function increment count. I'm just going to copy the same thing from here. Okay, and this is how you create functions. It's pretty simple. It's similar to what it's done in C. You just write the keyword function, the name of the function, and in the round brackets over here, you add the parameters that you want. And then in the curly brackets is the scope for that function. And over here, what I'm going to say is, let's first initialize the count. I'm going to say var count is equals to 0. What we did is we created a variable called count. And again, you don't have to necessarily always use the var. You could also say count is equal to 0. Okay. So you said var count is equal to 0, and then say count is equal to count plus 1. Correct. And then we want to say when someone increments its count, we want to put it inside this element that we have over here, right? Which is called as count. And to do that, we are going to say the dollar sign again, and we're going to use count.html, and we are going to use the count variable that we just got, right? So this count variable, we're going to add it to this div which is called as count over here, right? So we're going to save it. Let's go back over here, and I'm going to refresh this page. So right now the count is nothing. Then as soon as I press the button, I get 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, right? So we created a simple counter for us. I should rather call this increment, which makes it look better. And again, here's what we did. We created a simple button element. We said button ID is equal to button because we're going to use this button ahead. So we want the ID. We are going to use this div to store the count, to print this count to our page. We created a simple div, and we created ID is equal to count. Now what we want to do is whenever someone clicks on it, that's the reason we said button on click. We want to say increment count. And what is increment count? We created that function increment count over here, and we said count equals to count plus 1. And then we added this HTML to this div over here. For those who are done, now my job is, instead of saying just printing count over here, I want this count to be in the same div. I want to say new count is, and I want that thing to get printed over here. Instead of just saying count is, I'm going to remove this. And our task is to print all the numbers from 1 to 10. Whenever someone clicks on that button, we want to print that number on the page. But we don't want that number to disappear, the older number. When I press 1, now 1 is going away, right? I don't want that. I want the entire list to be there. I want 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on coming in one after the other. So how would you go about doing that? You need to change this line. Instead of saying count HTML equals to count, every time we're going to click on it, it's going to change the HTML inside it. We don't want that. We want this number to go on from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. We want the entire list on that page. How will you go about doing that? Go ahead and do a Google search, because the way I like to teach you guys is to make sure that you are able to find things on your own instead of just me telling things and you copying the same syntax. There is no point in doing that. I want to make sure that you understand it and you are able to find things on your own on Google and then be able to try and work out things yourself. How will you change this line over here such that instead of this thing which is getting replaced, I want to have the entire list 1, 2, 3 and so on this page populated. Here's how I would go about searching it. I'm over here, go to Google, and I'm going to say, instead of writing to that HTML div, we want to append to that div. I'm going to say jQuery because this is the library we are using. And then I'm going to say append to HTML div. I search for that, and the first thing that comes up is you see that append function over here. So I'm going to click it, and I'm going to see the jQuery documentation over here, and I see an example. You just see something which is similar that we did. Instead of the pound selector, we have a dot selector over here, which is for the class. If you have ID over here, you use pound. If you have a class over here, which you want to select, you use a dot selector, and then you say append this paragraph, correct? Instead of the HTML over here, I'm just going to change it to append. Save it, and then go over here, refresh it, and I'm going to say new count is, and as you see, I'm printing out the entire list. And if you want it on the new line, you could also say count plus, maybe you just add a break element. So I just added a BR over there. See, now it's on new line then. You could try searching for different things and you would arrive at the same point. Let's say jQuery add to HTML div, not replace. See, that got automatically populated. I didn't search for it. Then you see a first Stack Overflow question over here. You go over here, look at the most upvoted answer, and you see that they are saying dot append over here as well. There are different ways to arrive at the same thing, but I want you to be able to find those things by yourself, and that's why I'm teaching you how do I read it or no, how do I go about searching it. Now that we have done that, the next thing that I want to show you a little, and I'm not going to go too much in detail about it, is just to be able to play around with arrays in JavaScript and make sure that you understand how did we write this line over here. As I said, JavaScript is event driven. So over here, we are not going to wait for anyone who's going to click on this button. We just created a event handler over here. So we said button on click, and we gave a function name over here, right? So instead of writing the function name and then creating a function, you could also written the function in the same place over here. And I'll show you in the next example that we do how to just write your function directly in this parameter over here. And as I said, in JavaScript, you could pass functions as objects. So you could pass functions to each other, but sometimes difficult for beginners. So I don't tend to write function right over here, but I trying to separate that out for you guys. Let's create a simple array and print that out to our console. That will help us see how arrays work. So I'm just going to remove everything. Let's create a simple array. My array is equal to, and again, this is array is also an object, and it could have different data types stored in it. There are some languages such as C wherein your array could only have all integers or all characters. But in JavaScript, you could have an integer followed by a string. They don't use the word integers over there. They have a data type called number, which works for any kind of number. Anything which is not in a string for JavaScript is a number, and everything is an object overall. Let's say Code Heroku. Then what I want to do is print all of these elements to our console. What we're going to do is say my array. And now I want you to be able to find out on Google through the documentation which is available online, how are you going to print all these elements to the screen. So you want something over here, you want my array dot something, which is going to print. And you already know to print to the console, you're going to use console.log, right? But my task for you right now is to find out what will you use on this my array to print something to our console. I could just directly go ahead and tell you the names of the function, but that's not going to help you in long run. All you're going to do is just copy and write that code, and maybe you'll remember it for a while, but that doesn't help you long term and gives you that confidence to say that, you know what, I could do it myself as well. So go ahead, Google it, and try to see how would you print all the elements of an array for JavaScript. Yep, so Arpit says use .each. Try to use that and see if you can get that working, and see if you understand the syntax over there as well. So guys, here's what we are trying to do. We are trying to print all the elements of this array. And instead of me just saying what that function needs to be, I want you to be able to go to Google and find out what is the name of that function that you're going to use to print all the elements of an array to our console. .each is asking function name as a parameter. Is that optional? So no, that's not an optional parameter. The function name over there is the function which is going to get executed once it's able to get that element from that array. Again, it's event driven. It's not going to happen in sequentially always. If the element in an array is huge, like 1 megabyte object or something like that, you don't want your JavaScript code to wait until that it fetches that entire object from the memory. That's why you have a function which gets called after that element is fetched. Here's how I would go about searching it, okay? A lot of you have seen that you need to use an option called each or for each. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say JavaScript, because that's what we are using. JavaScript, that's the first thing that I wrote. And then I said print all elements of array. Let's go to the first link over here. It seems like you could use it two ways. You could have an array and then you could write a for loop similar to what you could use in a C++ or C code, or you could use something like a for each. Over here, there is an example called examples.forEach, and then you have function parameter. Here's what we are going to do. We are going to use the for each. So I'm going to say my array, and then I'm going to say for each. And we can also look at the documentation. Here's a documentation, array.prototype for each. And over here, they say array for each. You had the function which is getting called once the element is executed. We're going to say for each function. Remember, in the code that we had written below, we had written that function outside, but it's the same thing. You could write the function outside as well. Here's how I read this. I have a for each function and I want to execute a new function when this element is fetched from that memory. So I'm going to say I want a function to get executed. And the way we write functions is we add a curly bracket, we add round bracket, and then a pair of curly brackets. Just I added 2 line breaks, and this is how the code looks. And over here, this function will get called automatically with the element which is fetched. As a parameter of this function, your JavaScript engine is going to pass that element over here. The element from my array is going to come to this element variable over here inside this function. And then we just say console.log element. Save it. And then let's just go to our page, refresh it. We don't need any of these. We just printed something to our console. As you see, we got this printed over here. There are different ways of doing it. And this is not necessarily the most efficient way. Some of you might prefer using the for loop, which is something like this. So you use something like this: for I is equal to my array dot length, I is greater than 0, I minus minus. You could also use I plus plus to if you want to start from 0, and you just say my array of I. This is going to also work. There are different ways of doing the same thing. Over here, what we are going to use is the for each method, which the array prototype object provides us. There is a method inside this array object which helps us to print everything. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to use an API. And to do that, I have a sample project for you that it has a basic HTML and CSS in there, but which is going to help us to make things interesting. We don't want to just write this stuff in a blank page like this. I have a basic HTML CSS page that I have created for you guys. I'm going to copy and paste the link for that zip file to you, and I want you to download that. Okay, so download this file, just unzip it and open it in your browser. I'm going to go to this link and I'm going to paste the link over here in the chat box. Download the zip file, just unzip it. Let me download it again. Show files in folder. Right, so I have a weather.zip. Okay, that's the file. I'll take this over here, copy it to a place where I want to work it with. I'm going to paste it. I'm just going to extract it. I'm going to say right click, extract all. I'm going to extract it over here. Make sure you're just not double clicking over there and just playing over there. Just make sure you extract it and then work on it. Then open the weather.html file in Chrome. It's simple HTML, CSS code. We don't have any JavaScript over here yet, but what we are going to do is be able to get the data from a real weather API and populate our page over here. The only thing we did was I gave you this sample zip file, which is just simple HTML and CSS. There is no JavaScript in there. There is this weather card over there, which we are going to use to get the data from a service, web service, and populate this data on this page dynamically based on today's weather. What does the colon after do? So it's a CSS tag, right? So it's a CSS way of saying that once you are done with adding that element, after that div, you want to have this CSS tag. So let's say anytime you wanted that div or that class to appear when someone uses class X. Let's say you want class Y to appear anywhere after the class X. So you just say colon CSS and then say the after keyword, and then that is going to get populated over there. I just want you to open this HTML page. You haven't done anything on it yet. But now what we are going to do is now get the data from an API and populate it dynamically. Right now there is a lot of static text over there, but we want to populate it using the data from our API. Let's do this. The next thing we want to do is now go to and find an API where we can get our data from. So there is this service called as openweathermap.api. I'm going to copy this and paste the link as well for you guys. Okay, so this is where I'm going. And what I did was now I just signed up for this page over here on the sign in page. What I'm going to do is, no, you don't have to do that right now. Just look at it because it takes time for you to get approved. Activation is not instant. So what I'm going to do is just going to show you how did I got few things that I'm going to share with you. So I went over here and I said hello.codehiroku@gmail.com. This is our email address. I'm going to use our password. Once I'm over here, all right, so I'm inside. Let's look at their API. So over here, they are saying, I clicked over here, I went to the API tab, and this is the current weather data. We want the current weather data from them. Let's see the API documentation. And over here, they are saying that this is how you call our API. You use this thing, api.weather.2.5, and you give the city name. Instead of those curly bracket city name, you will use the city name. And here is an example that given, weather Q is equal to London. So let's execute that. So let's click on this link. As you see, it gives you the weather conditions in London, right? Let me go back over here. What we are trying to do is now get the data from this Open Weather Map API. I went to the Open Weather Map website and I went to the API. I went to the API documentation. This is how you would call your API. You would use this link. So let's go over here and say paste it. Instead of city name, let's say Mumbai. And not all of your cities might be available. So use any major city that for testing purposes, you could use Mumbai, Delhi, or something like that. I'm going to say Mumbai. And what it says to me over here is invalid API key, or I haven't submitted an API key. What they don't want is any random guy to be able to click that link and spam that or launch a DNS attack on them. They don't want that. And that's the reason they have an API key over here. So how do I get my API key? You go to your account over here. Okay, that's where we went. In the members section, you go to your API keys. I have a key for you over here. So what I'm going to do is give you this key for now so that you will be able to use it for some time. And I'm hoping that you don't block my account. I'm going to delete that key after the session anyways, but if you try it tomorrow or no, after some days, it might not work. So what you would need to do is sign up for your account and then get your own key. Go to your account over here in the members section and the API keys and get your own key from here, okay? But for today, I'm going to give you this key. And the way you add your key is just say and app ID is equal to your key. And this is going to give it the credentials for us to be able to get this data from them. So here we are seeing a bunch of JSON objects which we are getting. These units over here right now they might be in degree Fahrenheit or something. So you want to make sure that the unit that they are using is a metric unit. So we are going to say and unit equals to metric. So here now, as you see, I'm getting the temperature in Celsius. Let me make sure that units is equal to metric, not just units. So you say units is equal to metric. And now as you see, the maximum temperature is 28, which sounds more like in degrees Celsius. I'm going to paste this link for you. Have this link. Make sure that you change your API key with yours after a few days, because I'm going to delete that key in few days. I'm going to paste this link for you guys, and you have my API key to work with. So if you use this API, if you click on this link on your browser, you should be able to see this data over here. I showed you how did I get over here. I think I went step by step on how did I go about finding this API. We went to the documentation, we searched for the current weather API. We had few parameters over there. So we said Q equals to Mumbai, which is the query. And we said we want the location as Mumbai. We said this is our app ID, which is our API key. And then we said we want the units as metric. This is raw JSON format, right? So we don't want to use JSON and directly display the JSON to our users. But what we want to do is be able to get this data from the API and put it onto our page, right? Which is over here. So what we want to do is let's go ahead and edit this page. So what I'm going to do is go to this weather.html. I'm going to go over here. And again, we are going to use jQuery. At the end, we have the same jQuery link that we used before over here as well. Take the data which is from this API and let's just first print it to the screen so that we know that we are getting it, right? Let's do it one step at a time. First step is to take that data and print to our console. So here's how I will do it. I'm going to say we'll start writing another script. Come over here. So we started writing a new script. At the end of the bottom of this page, we said, let's create a new script. And then what we want to do is create a function over here. We want to say get JSON. So we want to use jQuery. So that's why we use $sign over there. And then we said get JSON. Get JSON is the function which is going to help us get the JSON API that we just spoke about. What we're going to do is come over here and add the link that we just had. I'm just going to copy this link and add it as the first parameter to this function. I'm saying use jQuery, get JSON, and the second parameter to this function is the function which is going to get called after this JSON is fetched from the web. Similar to the myArray function, similarly how we were getting the elements from the array and then printing it. Over here as well, we are getting the JSON, and after that element is fetched, it's going to call a new function. So I'm going to say display data. For display data is the function which is going to get called, and let's define this display data function. So I'm going to say function display data, and this is going to get called with the weather data. And you could add any name over here. We don't know what the name is. The only thing we know is when this function is going to call, your jQuery is going to put the data over here, and we are calling it weather data. And then we're going to come over here and then we just say console.log weather data, because that's what we want. We want to make sure that we are getting it and we are just printing that to the console. We'll save it. Then let's go to our page again, refresh it. We won't see anything over here because we added it to the console. Let's go to inspect console. And as you see, we have an object over here. And inside this object, we have all the data fields that we are getting. It says name Mumbai. The weather information is over here. The temperature minimum, maximum. The main temp is over here. So we got that element printed to the screen. Here's what we did. We wanted to get the data from our API. And now we want to populate this our page dynamically using JavaScript, right? To do that, the first step we want to do is be able to just print that information to our console. And to print that to a console, what we did is we used the get JSON function which jQuery provides us. If the data is available in CSV, you could use get CSV. You could use all different formats. And in the first parameter, we gave it the link where you want to get it from. And in the second parameter, we want to say the function which is going to get called after this data is fetched from the internet. So we said function display data, and we said console.log weather data over here. And that gave us the weather data printed on our screen. So once you are over here, we were able to print something onto the screen. Now what we want to do is let's make some observations on how this JSON element is structured, which will help us to get this information out from here and print it to our screen over here. Let's look at the JSON structure over here closely. Now over here, as you see, we are getting a JSON object coming in. And inside over here, let's say I want the temperature. Okay, so the temperature is inside an object called as main. So you have the JSON data dot main. And inside this main, there is temperature. Inside there is called as main dot temp. And this is how the JSON object is structured. And to use it, we'll do the same thing. We'll go over here. And now I want to populate the temperature over here, right? Let's go up over here and see where the temperature is. So you see a clear night, there is the name of the location. And then you have something called as temperature div, which is empty right now. And what you want to do is add something to this div. And we already know how to do that. There is this, we have an ID. We're going to copy this ID. We're going to come over here using jQuery. The way we're going to select it is use the $sign and have the pound selector. And inside this, we want to just add the temperature, right? So we're just going to say HTML. Now, what should we add over here? We know that it is inside element called as main. So we said weather data dot main dot temp. That's where the location for the temperature is inside the JSON object. That's what we saw over there. We're going to save it. Let's go back over here and then refresh this page and let's see if we get our temperature over here. As you see, we got 27.5 degrees Celsius right over there. Next thing that I want you to do is once you are done with that, go ahead and change the name of the location over here as well. Right now, this is static. I want you to be able to get this data. That data is also there in the API response over here. It's right over here. So make sure you go ahead and change the location name as well. And tell me how would you do that? Yep, so Deepak says you use the pound location .html weather data .name. That's gonna change the location name. Let me go ahead and change that as well. You know what? The name of the location is over here. Let's just remove this because I don't want anything getting populated before that. So I'm just gonna save it. I see the ID is location. I'll just come over here and let's just copy this thing. Instead of temperature div, I'm just gonna say location.html is weather data .name. Let's see if that works. Refresh this. As you see, we got this name changed over there. As a homework assignment or something that you might want to try out, what you could do is try to search for how can you replace this background, right? So you could add some if-else statements and change this background based on the temperature or the time of the day it is, because right now it's giving a background for the night, right? So you can add some few if-else statement and change the background according to the temperature or the time of the day, okay? And please add some reviews for us over here so that it helps us to know how we are doing in our sessions. I'm gonna add this link over here. Please go over here and put some reviews for us so that it helps us to change the way we are teaching it or tells us how well did we do. If you don't like something, please still go ahead and write something over there so that it helps us improve our future sessions. All right. Thanks for your time, and I shall take your leave. I know it was a bit, we went over time, and thanks for staying till the end. I hope to see you guys in our future sessions.